All right, so in this week, we're going to continue talking about how stress affects your body. And one of the areas that you're going to be looking at today are what we've learned from the baboons with Robert Sapolsky's research. And so you're going to be watching a hour-long documentary that's called A Portrait of Stress. And it will focus on what we've learned from the baboons. Essentially, primates are super smart and they're organized just enough to devote their free time to being miserable to each other and stressing each other out. But if you get chronically stressed, psychosocially stressed, you're going to compromise your health. So baboon populations are actually really good model systems for us to study because they behave a lot like we do, except they're even a little bit nastier to each other. So they do cause each other a lot of stress. So overall, what we see when the baboons have lower rank in their society, they have greater amounts of stress, and they show more disease states as well that are associated with stress. Their reproductive systems don't work as well, their wounds heal more slowly, they have higher blood pressure, and they show more anxiety. However, when we see the type A baboons, the ones that are in charge of the troops, or are the dominant males, they tend to fight more and they have to be constantly on the lookout for challenges. And so this actually will increase their stress levels as well. They tend to have higher blood pressure and they have more cardiovascular disease. This happens especially when the troop is not stable and there's lots of confrontations going on by the lower rank males that are trying to gain the dominant position. And in fact, they found that social isolation is the worst for the health of the baboons. So if they become isolated or outcast from the society, that's when they have most of the stress-related disease states popping up. And for males, they found that the ones that are most protected from stress are the ones that are kind of in the middle. They're not the leaders of the society and they're not the lowest rank. They're the males that are involved more in grooming and socialization with the other females in the troop, but not necessarily vying for the mating rights to the females in the population. Those are left for, again, the upper ranked males that have more power in this society. So what they found is that the social connectedness is far more important than rank. So what does this say for human populations? The conditions in which you live and work are vital to your health. And so what they show is when you have more autonomy and control over your position in society, overall you have less stress and this gives you better health. So some of the early social stress that you can see in human populations are associated with certain risk factors like low socioeconomic status and poverty. This creates a more stressful environment. If in your childhood you've had sexual abuse or physical abuse, neglect or poor parental care, or separation from parents, this can lead to early social stress in the human population, and this can cause earlier stress-related disease states to pop up. Good parental care, however, can offset some of the harshest stressors, such as poverty. So if your parents are there and they're loving you, even if you don't have enough to eat all the time, you're going to be better off than if you don't have that parental care. So we can see this when we look at events that have happened throughout history, such as the Dutch hunger winter. So the Dutch hunger winter happened during World War II when the Germans cut off the railroad lines and did not allow food transport into the Dutch area. And what happened is that people just ended up starving to death. Over 20,000 people died due to hunger and starvation during this time. And so people that were actually born during the Dutch hunger winter, as adults, they have increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased hypercholesteremia, so they have increased high cholesterol. They also have increased risk for obesity and diabetes, all from being born during the Dutch hunger winter. So what happened is when they were born into the world, they saw the world as being an unfriendly place. And so their body said, hey, there's not too many calories out here. We've got to conserve everything that we get. And so their metabolism became much more efficient with the calories that they're getting. So that when they get into a place where they have enough calories, they actually can develop things like obesity and diabetes much more prevalently, because their metabolism is so good at harvesting those calories. This is an example of where your environment can have a big effect on your health. So these would be things that are outside of your control. So we talked earlier that parental care can help offset early stressors in life. And so Mary Ainsworth Maternity Sensitivity Scale helps measure the sensitivity of parents and their response to their children. So when you have sensitive parents based on this scale, they're going to respond promptly and empathetically towards their infants. They're more available, less rejecting, and more cooperative with the infants. So on this sensitivity scale, there's 4 dimensions of responsiveness. Sensitivity to insensitivity, so that's going to be one scale. Acceptance and rejection, availability versus neglect, and cooperation versus interference. So infants that are raised with parents that have lower maternal sensitivity scores, as they're growing, they're going to show failure to thrive. They may have growth abnormalities, cardiovascular irregularities, and inflammatory diseases in childhood. These are all conditions that are exacerbated by having this stressor of not having good parenting. However, when people have higher MS scores, they're generally healthier, more socially and cognitively developed. As children, they have higher academic success, and as adults, they have higher sense of security, a lower propensity for depression and anxiety, and lower risk for obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. So this underscores the importance of sensitive parenting. So also this week we'll be watching a TED Talk about telomere length and cellular aging. And so I wanted to give you an introduction into telomere length. You're also going to have an assignment, which is one of your major assignments in the class. This will be our group activity. And this will focus on telomeres and stress as well. So telomere length is associated with longevity in humans and other species. And so humans have linear chromosomes or their genetic material, so their DNA, and this is where their genes are located that are going to be expressed to give you different characteristics throughout your life. And on the ends of the chromosomes, you have these structures that are called telomeres. And telomeres are just repeating sequences of DNA, all repeating at the ends of the chromosome, and they serve to protect the ends of the chromosome. So they form these cap-like features at the ends, and they help protect the DNA when the cells are dividing. So every time the cell divides, the ends of the chromosomes don't get replicated correctly, like a little tiny bit gets cut off each time. And so you see over the lifetime of an organism, the telomeres get shorter and shorter, depending how many cell divisions they've undergone. During our lifetime, your telomeres will get shorter and shorter as you age. So there is an enzyme that can be expressed that will help lengthen the telomeres, and this enzyme is called telomerase. However, it usually is only active when you're in the womb and developing in your mother's stomach. Once you're born, the telomerase enzyme activity goes way down. So you do have some expression during childhood and adulthood, but it's very minimal. So there's been thought that maybe reactivating telomerase activity could increase longevity. However, there has to be care taken here because telomerase is an enzyme that gets activated again in cancer cells. And so we want to make sure that we're not going to, make people more prone to getting cancer if we try to reactivate this enzyme inside of people's cells to give them greater longevity. So during some stressful events, it looks like those stressor can actually cause increased shortening of the telomeres. And so you could imagine that if you have a lot of stress in your life, that this is going to cause shortened telomeres and potentially affect your overall longevity and cellular aging processes. So if we look at the people that were born during the Dutch hunger winter, there actually is no correlation with telomere length with the experience of famine during gestation. So this was done in a cohort study of 131 individuals that were born between 1943 and 1946, with the median age of 68 years. So this study had 45 people born before the famine, 41 exposed to famine during gestation, and 45 conceived after the famine. So this was a really good pool of people to try to look at telomere length. And so again, this is a cohort study. And what they found is that there was no real significant difference between the telomere length in these three different groups. However, what they did show is that socioeconomic status did have correlation with telomere length. Subjects whose fathers were manual workers compared with lower to upper middle class occupations had significantly shorter telomeres. So your socioeconomic status in life and your poverty level can cause enough stress within your life that you may have shorter telomeres growing up. Alcohol consumption was also correlated with telomere length. So people who had frequent consumption, especially of spirits, so the hard liquors or the hard alcohols, showed shorter telomeres as well. This was also correlated with the history of cancer diagnosis and self-reported health. So people who had lower socioeconomic status and frequent alcohol consumption also reported a history of cancer diagnosis and self-reported that their health was not as optimal as they would like it to be. So another study showed that caregivers are under chronic stress, especially if you're having to care, say, for a sick child. And so people who are caregivers and are under this chronic stress situation, and you're taking care of a loved one that has a disease, then you tend to have reduced wound healing. It can take 24% longer for wounds to heal. So this is an indication that the immune system is lacking or being inhibited. And this also can lead to impaired vaccine response time or increased overall inflammation and also shorter telomeres. So conclusion, chronic caregiving leads to accelerated aging. It's a very stressful event when you have to be giving care chronically to a loved one. So what can you do to protect your telomeres? This is going to be what we're going to focus on this week in class. So in class, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So we'll talk more about this on Wednesday.